Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Making Friends with Your Food. I'm Dr. Doug Graham, along with my partner, Professor Rosalind Grubin. We'll be talking about various aspects of our relationship with food, from nutrition to social issues to meal planning, and sharing our insights of almost 40 years in the raw food movement. We look forward to making this valuable for you. Our motto is to promise little and deliver a lot. So sit back, enjoy. There will be time for questions and answers, so if you do have questions, we really rather that you hold unless you absolutely can't help yourself. It does, for the essence of time, to stay right with our program. In this first section, we're going to discuss about nutrition, what we call digestible nutritional science. And we're going to give you the simple basics of nutrition, starting with what we call the caloronutrients: carbohydrates, fat, and protein. The nutrients that supply us with calories. In an effort to make nutrition simpler, we're not going to go into great depth in the basis of this program. We'll save that for courses on nutrition. There needs to be at least some starting ground. And so what you'll see is that we cover the concepts of protein, fat, and carbohydrate at the beginning of the course, and then everything else will build. Each section stands completely on its own. It's also a program that is designed to build one upon the next. Each stack, like building a house, will start with the foundation. And the foundation is always the nutritional sciences. Most people talk about protein and fat. I'm going to start by talking about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates come in two main categories: complex and simple. Complex carbohydrates are bland, they require cooking, and they are slower to digest. The simple carbohydrates taste sweet. We normally think of them as sugar in and of itself, but actually all carbohydrates are sugar. It's just some are complex, some are simple. The simple carb tastes sweet. When we think of simple carbs, most people say you're talking candy or cake or sugar. We certainly recognize in nutrition that all sugars are not created equally, and yet the carbohydrates that are in fruits that make them taste sweet as well are just as much carbohydrate, and certainly in many ways far more valuable, which we'll talk about. The idea that we need to control or curb our sweet tooth is one that has been promoted again and again. As a child, I was encouraged to get a handle on my sweet tooth, and I've heard the expression from adults, if I could just control my sweet tooth, or I've got a sweet tooth and it throws me around the room rather than me having a handle on it, it controls me. I've grown to have a great respect for the human body and its ability to tell us what it needs and give us feedback via symptoms and other levels of our awareness. Could you imagine if you tried to control your sense of thirst? Or if you said, I'm not going to go to the bathroom. I don't care what my body tells me. I'm not going. I'm going to control it. Or control your need for sleep. Our sweet tooth is a natural thing. It's a good thing. In fact, it's a good thing because every cell of the human body is fueled by glucose and fructose. These are simple sugars, and they are the two sugars that fuel every cell of the body. If we use fat or we use protein for fuel, the body will first convert it to glucose or fructose. We understand that it's important to have sufficient fuel. If you run out of gas in your car, it doesn't matter how good your battery is, you've got a problem. In the world of sports, we've heard that expression called hitting the wall, which will happen to a person after approximately 90 minutes of intense exercise, where they run out of available carbohydrate fuel and have to start converting fat into carbohydrate. This is a much more difficult thing. You start running out of sheer will rather than having plenty of fuel available. When we go back and look at the basics as they are taught in nutrition, what we find out is that the authorities who make the MDRs, the RDAs, the nutritional suggestions of what we should eat around the world, these RDAs are in agreement recommending between 65% to 75% of total calories coming from carbohydrates. This only leaves 15% a piece to 20%, possibly. It only leaves a small percent of the total calories we take in for the day to come from fat and protein. We start with carbs because carbohydrates are our essential fuel. They are the nutrient that we must have. Of the 3 caloronutrients, carbohydrates are the one that we need in the greatest abundance. In the cooked food world, it's easy to get carbohydrates in great abundance. We know about the breads and the pastas and other ways to get it, the potatoes and the tubers and on and on. But in the simple carbohydrate world, we only find one valid source of simple carbohydrates, which is fruit. In the raw world, we only find one source of simple carbohydrates, fruits. Fruits are an excellent source, but fruits have 2 qualities about them that make them a little more challenging for people coming from a cooked diet to consume in sufficient quantity, and that is that they're high in water and they have a lot of fiber. Both of these things make them take up more space than a piece of bread or a potato. When we add water and we add fiber, both essential nutrients, both nutrients that we know we need, the fiber in fruits, known as guar and pectin, are the very fibers that are used to protect us so that we don't uptake sugar too rapidly when we consume it. So fruits come, yes, with a lot of carbohydrates, but they come with their own built-in protection so that that carbohydrate won't harm you in any way. I think about the idea of controlling my sweet tooth, and I go, why would I want to do that? In order to get a large portion of my total calories coming from carbohydrates, I eat a large portion of my total diet as fruit. This, to me, is the good point. I get to eat the thing that I like most. And I've asked a lot of people, and most people agree with me. The taste that we like best, the consistency we like best, the sensations of food that we tend to go for, that we want to remember from the meal, is sweet and juicy. When we taste sweet and juicy, we're happy. In fact, no matter what we eat for dinner, we finish with dessert because we want that taste in our mouth at the end of the meal. Very rarely are people going for something such as fats for dessert. Oh, just give me a stick of butter, I'll have it for dessert. Or let me just have a few swallows of oil, I'll have it for dessert. What we're looking for is that simple carbohydrate sensation. Yes, we've been trained to have other taste sensations as well, and we will talk about that, how we can train ourselves to go back to the foods that are more within our nature in order to focus on high carbohydrate intake, sufficient quantity intake in order to be able to get enough carbohydrates, because if we don't get enough carbohydrates, certain predictable things will happen to us. Because we know that complex carbohydrates also can work for us, we've tried them. And yes, they are virtually the definition of empty calories because we destroy so many of the nutrients when we cook those complex carbohydrates. So we're getting the carbohydrate calories, but without all the nutrients, the enzymes, coenzymes, antioxidants, phytonutrients, many of the vitamins and minerals as well have been damaged. So in this cooking process, we're making those complex carbohydrates literally into empty calories. But with the simple carbohydrates, in order to be able to consume them in a way that you go, I'm really happy with this, it requires some practice. Being able to expand the stomach so that it can handle the volume of food that would be normal for us had we been doing that all along. Because we've been eating concentrated foods without the water and without the fiber, we have over time lost this ability to expand our stomach. It shrinks down, and this makes it more of a challenge. Now, rather than try to control the sweet tooth, what I look to do instead is get cues from my body. What is it telling me? So I think, at the end of the meal, and this happened to me to the point of training, at the end of the meal, do you look for something sweet? If you find that, yeah, sure, of course, at the end of a meal I'm looking around for something sweet, well, what it's telling you is you haven't had enough simple carbohydrates. From a food combining issue, which we'll discuss a little bit later, it's a smarter bet to eat your simple carbohydrates first rather than eat them last. From a point of view of, am I getting enough simple carbohydrates, it also makes more sense to eat them first rather than last. The likelihood that you're going to eat them in sufficient quantity at the end of a meal is not very good. So as I say, certain predictable things happen. If we eat insufficient simple carbohydrates, it's very likely that you will be driven, craving for complex carbohydrates, because your body's going to tell you, I need more carbs. The only fuel for my cells is carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are still more easily digested, more easily converted to simple carbohydrates by the body than fats or proteins could be. Or we're driven to candy, or we're driven to alcohol, or we're driven to chocolate, or we're driven somewhere to get those carbohydrates. If we are not, and some people's physiology, they're not in touch with it enough to be in tune and go, what I need is more carbs. If we undereat on the simple carbs, some find they're so hungry that they want calories, and they'll want to eat more fat and more fat and more fat in order to get sufficient calories to feed their body. Unfortunately, fats don't give the same cue as far as telling you you've had enough to eat, and fats supply, in most cases, between 10 to 20 times as many calories per bite. So before we know that we've eaten such a huge number of calories from fat, we've actually already tended to overeat on them. Overeating on fat definitely is a problem. So these predictable things happen. We're driven to complex carbs. We're driven to non-healthy sources of simple carbs. We may be driven to consume huge quantities of fat, and/or without this carbohydrate fuel, the same thing happens to us as happens to our car. We've run out of gas. And we hear more people talking all the time that they're tired all the time. Feel like I've got no get up and go, got no energy. Invariably, when we teach people to change their diet to include more fruits as a source of simple carbohydrates so that they can increase the percentage of total calories as the caloronutrient carbohydrate, usually within a day, sometimes 2 or 3 days, but almost immediately we see people go, wow, all of a sudden I've got so much energy. It just worked like a charm. What they've got is available fuel. We'll talk again about this difference between fuel and energy and why we make a distinction. But what they have is no fuel available, no sensation of energy, plenty of fuel available, plenty of sensation of energy. It would be really easy to spend a night talking with you about carbohydrates, but we're giving an overview and we set a stage. So what I want to do at this point, give you a guideline of how much fruit it actually takes in order to be able to consume a minimum of 65 to 75%, as is recommended by the RDAs around the world. We're not coming up with a new program. It's the same program, but it's the same program taught in a way that will allow you to do it healthfully or do it happily. Because most folks, even though they know that we're supposed to eat more carbohydrates and less fats, we don't see that shift happening in the American diet. In the last 20 years, the amount of fat consumed has stayed the same. Although 20 years ago it was said that we ate 43% fat, and today the standard American diet is down to 42% fat. This insignificant change could be the way that the statistics are measured. We don't know, but it's an insignificant change. We don't see people shifting down to the 5, 10, 15% fat range that's being recommended by health experts worldwide. So what we want to do is give you ways to be happy and healthy. In order to be healthy about the high carbohydrate consumption, the carbohydrates come from simple carbohydrates rather than complex ones. In order to be happy about it, they also need to be healthy choices, fruits, rather than the simple carbohydrates from refined foods, empty calories, leaving you sick, because it's always easier to be healthy than it is to be sick. Fruits on average are about 7% protein. On average, they're about 93% carbohydrates. In order to get 75 or possibly even more % of total calories from a food that's 93% carbs, it's obvious that we need to eat more than 75% of our total food as fruits. In order to do this, the program that we've ended up with is one that allows you to have all the fruit you care for breakfast, all the fruit you care for lunch, and if you have any inclination to eat anything sweet at all before dinner, have fruit yet again before the dinner meal. The simple way of saying that is if it's daylight eat fruit. Granted, this is a generic suggestion. Each and every person comes into a raw food dietary approach with an accumulation of health history, very often health hazards, that need to be dealt with individually. And we could no more take a generic program and just say, oh, it works for everybody every single time. Well, in fact, the healthy diet does work for everybody every single time. There's no contraindications to a healthy diet, but people need to transition to it at a speed that will allow them to come from whatever level of health they're having, whatever challenges in health they're experiencing, to build back to healthy eating. And with this in mind, we recommend that people who want to have professional guidance, or people who feel that they need professional guidance because of their specific health concerns, get some help from someone who can actually guide them through the transition, because we've already made the mistakes that we want to help you to avoid making. With that in mind, what we want to encourage people to do is to allow themselves to be able to eat as much fruit as they care for. As a training program, this may mean occasionally as much fruit as you can, so that you build up the ability to consume the high-water, high-fiber, low-fat foods, the perfect foods for humankind, the foods that all creatures that are built anatomically and physiologically similar to us consume in great proportions of their diet. In fact, the more closely an animal is built like us, the higher the percentage of fruits in their diet. This draws to a close the segment on carbohydrates. Respect your sweet tooth, honor your sweet tooth, use your sweet tooth as a way to train your body and to listen to your body of, am I getting enough carbohydrates in the course of my day?
Greetings. I have a love personally of quotes. I find them inspiring and they stimulate a lot of personal thought. And there's a quote by Mark Twain that says, habit is habit, and not to be flung out of the window, but to be coaxed downstairs one step at a time. I've been trying to coax my habits downstairs one step at a time for a long time. I was Bella's age, I would imagine. How old are you, Bella? Yeah, maybe a couple of years older, perhaps. You're 9. Okay, you sure? Do you want to make it 10? I mean, you have an opportunity here to get older. I was around that age when I realized the habits that I developed in those few years were not serving me. And that was when my interest for studying nutrition and what creates health and studying began. I'm looking forward to sharing the things that I've discovered with you all. I begin this little section talking about fat. Usually when I say that, people go, and they pull in their tummies and think I'm talking about fat on your body. Well, the amount of fat that you consume will have an influence on how much fat you have on your body. That's not the whole part of the story. That whole issue about the amount of body fat a person carries and how to develop habits that allow you to live with the most healthful level of body fat, that's something we're going to discuss. If I say the word fat, another thing that might come to mind is the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, something that's become very popular in recent years that people should concern themselves about. Before we go any further in discussing these fats, can we clarify that we understand what is meant by the term essential? Does anyone want to contribute how they would define that?
There are substances we need that the body cannot produce on its own.
Yeah, some of the nutrients that the body needs, it has the capacity of manufacturing and synthesizing itself. Others, it has to get in from the foods that you consume. The essential fatty acids are those fatty acids that you get into your system via your food choices. There are 3 acids specifically which are thought of to be essential, but only 2 of them that we now find are. There was an acid called arachidonic acid, which people used to think was imperative that we took into our system. We now find that if we have linoleic acid present, that our body is able to synthesize the arachidonic one. The other one is the alpha-linoleic. So it's the linoleic and the alpha-linoleic that are essential fatty acids. The omega-3 and the omega-6, where do they fit in? Linoleic acid is an omega-6 and alpha-linoleic acid is an omega-3. Arachidonic, the one we found that we actually can synthesize, is also a type of omega-6. Why is it important that we have a balance between the 2? In a nutshell, omega-6s are responsible for one aspect of our blood's viscosity, and omega-3 responsible for the other part of that. Omega-3 inhibit the blood's ability to clot, whereas omega-6, they promote the blood's ability to clot. We don't want our blood unable to clot, or if we cut ourselves, we would bleed to death. Also, we don't want that blood clotting inside our arteries, forming thrombus, where a clump of blood cells can block off the passage of blood going around your body. You can end up with a heart attack or a stroke. The balance between the two is what we need. Nature provides that perfect balance in the foods that are presented to us in our natural diet. We don't need to worry about going off and taking omega-3 supplements or omega-6 supplements, providing we're eating the foods that nature has designed for us in perfect balance. Talking about fat is a big subject. There's so many things that we could cover. I want to cover the essential points. Once fat gets past your taste buds, what does your body actually need fat for?
To help build cell membranes.
To help build cell membranes. And I'll give you a clue too. If you hadn't got any fat on your body, by the end of this evening, a certain part of you might be feeling like you wish you had got some fat. Protection. We use fat to protect various internal organs and our bones. We use fat to synthesize different things in addition to that. Your hormones, the little guys that go around in your body taking messages from one place to another, these are your hormones, and they depend a great deal on you having fat in your system. The electrical cables that allow your brain to communicate with the cells of your body, your nervous system, these telephone cables rely on the presence of fat to conduct their electrical messages. There's a sheath that surrounds the nerve fibers in your body called myelin, and if fat were not present in the body, you wouldn't be able to create this myelin sheath for yourself. The jobs of fat on your body are quite significant and quite extensive. We do need fat, and having a fat-free diet is not only undesirable, but it's impossible. The reason it's impossible is because all foods, to some degree, contain fat. It might be just a trace of fat, but they do contain fat. Fat in the diet and fat on your body, it's not only the fat that you eat that will end up being stored as fat on your body. If you eat excess of the other, what we call caloronutrients, those nutrients containing calories, which are proteins and carbs, they're the other ones, we can also end up with them being laid down as extra fat on the body. If we have too much fat in the body, other than obesity, the detrimental effects on your health.
Like cholesterol?
So what is cholesterol? Animal fat. Cholesterol is a fat that contains sterol. That's why it's cholesterol. And cholesterol is produced by the liver in accordance with the body's needs at any given time. Cells of the body communicate to the brain, tell the brain what the needs are, and the brain sends a message to the liver and asks it to either increase or decrease its production of cholesterol in order to meet the needs of the cells. All animals do exactly the same. Creatures that have a liver are producing cholesterol quite prolifically. When we consume their flesh or the secretions of their mammary glands, we are taking on board that cholesterol. This causes us a problem because it's excess to our requirements. It doesn't belong to us. We didn't need it. And it adheres to the inside of our arteries and cause blockages. When things build up on the inside of the arteries, we call that atherosclerosis or plaque. If you have an artery who is gradually getting clogged up with cholesterol and saturated fats, and I explained to you what saturated fats are, we find the blood has a real job getting through. And there comes a point with the blood cells when it's single file only. And then shortly after that, the artery can become blocked altogether. And if that artery is supplying blood to your brain, you get a stroke or a cerebral infarction, it's called, or if it was supplying the blood to your heart, you will have a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. This is a pretty serious topic, having excess cholesterol in your system. The other thing that I mentioned to you was saturated fat. A triglyceride is the name of the fat as it is floating around in your body. A triglyceride describes something, looks like a jellyfish. And it has 18 to 20 fatty acids hanging. I used to making models of what I teach and showing students, and I decided I was going to build a triglyceride. The glycerol base at the top and these chains of fatty acids hanging down. Very careful to make sure I had the correct 18 to 20 little fatty acids present. Doors shut, right in the middle of my model. I ended up with a glycerol and one line of fatty acids hanging down from the bottom. It's a funny story because it reminds of how you can affect triglycerides. You can do things to them which make them problematical inside your body. The way that these triglycerides are linked together, there are linkages throughout their length at varying different places. Even though they're linked together so that they form this pattern, there are open gaps in that linkage where nothing is attached. That is important for us because in order to be able to use that fat, we need to add things onto it. That's how nutrition works. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You don't take something into your body in terms of a nutrient and use it as is. We join things onto other things and put our internal jigsaw puzzle together. We might want to add on different nutrients to different gaps. Once we've done that, we're able to use that fat. Realize this is what all other creatures do. When they take on board a triglyceride that has open gaps in its linkages, they will add on nutrients to those open gaps so that they can use it. What has actually happened to this triglyceride, if it has been eaten by an animal, it's taking on plant-based foods, because plant-based foods have an enormous number of open gaps. Some have more open gaps than others, and the only one plant type that has minimal available open gaps is the coconut. When you eat mature coconut flesh, you will find that there is very few gaps available to you. When there's many gaps available, we call it
polyunsaturated?
Yes, unsaturated. Poly means multiple. So polyunsaturated would mean many open links. Coconuts tend to be more saturated. There's fewer links open. If the animal has added on the various nutrients it needs in order to use this fat, it has then become, is it still unsaturated? Can you now add on anything to it should you eat it? No. And this is the problem. When we take on fats from either animal flesh or mammary secretions of animals, what we're taking on board is fat that's already been used by them. The open linkages have already been used up. And the result of that is that we have no use for this. There's nothing we can do with this inside our body. And the body does the same thing with any substance within it that it either feels threatened by, has no use for, or otherwise is in excess. It tries to remove it from the body. And in order to do that, it needs to use its transport system. Your body's main transport system. Blood. What the body does, it tries to transport these fats in your blood on their way to the exit. Unfortunately, these saturated fats have the same habit as cholesterol, which is to adhere to the inside of the artery walls, that thing we call atherosclerosis, and eventually completely block off that artery. That's not something we want to happen. When we eat a diet based on plant-based foods, we are primarily eating foods whose fatty acid chains have many open links. So we can add on the nutrients that we need to use them and do so, and we don't suffer from this problem. However, any excess fat in the diet, be it from a plant-based form or from an animal source, is still problematical. When a high percentage of fat in the blood, it causes various problems. One of those problems is related to that disease we know as diabetes. Nobody in the room who hasn't heard of diabetes or knows somebody who's got diabetes. It's an organ in your body, your pancreas. The job of the pancreas is to secrete something called insulin. And insulin helps to usher the sugars out of the bloodstream and deliver them to the cells of the body. Problem is, when fat is present in the bloodstream, it inhibits insulin's ability to do that. So the sugars accumulate more and more in the blood, and we end up with diabetes and other things, which Doug will be talking about in more detail later on. It's problems too if we don't have enough fat. We have often dry skin, we have hormonal disturbances and infertility problems. The likelihood of people in the Western world to suffer from fat deficiency is very rare. The amount of fat people are consuming is way and far beyond the body's needs. We now know that taking in 10% or slightly less of your total calories in a day as fat is adequate for both men and women. Where do we get those fats from? The best way obviously is from our plant-based sources and in their raw natural state. I'm going to be talking later on about why raw fats are preferable to consume above and beyond heated fats, which have many problems attached to them. We're taking in our fats in a healthful way when we're getting them from things like nuts and seeds and avocados, but we need to bear in mind that those are very high concentrated forms of fat. We're still getting our fatty acids in through fruits and vegetables. And as Doug mentioned earlier, fruits are about 7% on average fat. 7% protein. When it comes to fruits containing fat, they have a relatively low quantity. Avocados, which people often think of as a protein food, are not a high protein food, but they are a very high fat food. Be really cautious about overeating avocados, because we can soon find that the percentage of fat has gone way beyond that recommended 10% or around that area. What about proteins? What do we know about proteins? Proteins are needed in the body for various purposes. Most people are familiar with the idea that they're needed for building and repair. And knowing that has led to many people enthusiastic about increasing their muscle mass to believe that if they sit around and eat protein, boing, a bicep's going to, or they're suddenly going to find a massive great quadricep appear in their leg because they're eating protein supplements and so on and so forth. This is a misunderstanding of how the body works. Protein in and of itself does not build muscle. The body builds muscle in response to physical activity and does so using the building blocks of protein. What do I mean by building blocks of protein? Have you heard the term amino acids? Amino acids, of which there are 22. I have read in some places they've said 23 because they've said two of them are so similar that they can either be considered as one or separated. But let's say 22. Of those 22 amino acids, a certain number of them, which is 8, are essential. Essential meant we have to get them in from the foods that we eat. We are unable to synthesize them within the body. And it is important that we do have protein in our diet. Once again, it's a nutrient that it can become a problem when people are taking in too much. The types of people who are liable to take in too much protein are particularly those people who believe it's a good way to reduce body fat and go on various commercial diets where high protein is recommended, and also bodybuilders and other such people who are interested in the belief that they can build their appearance muscular-wise through the foods that they eat. Excess protein consumption is when proteins are taken into the body above and beyond the body's needs. Of these 22 amino acids, including the 8 that are essential, what the body does is uses them as you would use bricks to build a house. The house is protein. The individual bricks are what we call the amino acids. When we take an excess of protein or amino acids into the system, one thing that happens that is detrimental to our health is we suffer from excessive acidity in our blood. Why would we suffer excess acidity? For one thing, amino acids, gives you a clue, amino acids are highly acidic. They're based in nitrogen, which is an extremely acidic substance. We require that the body secretes hydrochloric acid in order to break proteins down. It all becomes a very highly acid situation. When we have a high level of acid in our blood, what are the problems? Number one, our body has to keep its blood within very strict parameters in terms of alkalinity and acidity. If we take 14 and 0, and we take 0 as acid, and we take 14 as alkaline, do you know whereabouts on that scale the body has to hold its blood pH level? It's 7.4, you're correct, which makes it just the alkaline side of neutral. As soon as the body starts to become more acidic, it has to take action to preserve its integrity. What it does, it relies on its primary alkaline buffer salt in order to do that. Do you know which mineral that is? Calcium. What it does is it drains calcium out of the bones in order to put that calcium in the bloodstream to bring this overly acid blood back to 7.4, because it can only wander within very tiny parameters and your life is threatened. When we start to take calcium out of the bones, what disease do you think we might begin to suffer from? Osteoporosis. Another problem with excess protein, partially due to the acidity and largely to do with the consumption of cooked proteins, which we'll cover later on, is the result of rheumatoid arthritis. I have worked with people whereby we've simply minimized the protein in their diet, taken it right down, and the inflammation of their joints has been an amazing spectacle to observe, the speed with which the body has responded. Excess protein in the diet leads to premature aging, osteoporosis, rheumatoid arthritis, gout, kidney dysfunction, and a whole range of other really serious disorders. And yet, common amongst the population, for their biggest concern dietary-wise is, where do you get your protein? As if they're at some terrible risk of not consuming enough of the stuff. The fact of it is that if we are eating a plant-based diet in its raw natural state, yet again, nature has presented us with foods with the perfect ratio of protein held within them. When we start trying to make up the calories that we're searching for, or try and suppress the addictions that we've developed, and that's another subject, that we start depending on things like avocados and nuts and so on to try and meet that need. Unfortunately, we end up with the fat and the protein in the diet getting out of control, which isn't a good thing. Protein in the the diet is a very complex subject. We do have with us audio, so if it's a subject that you find really interesting about protein, it will answer your questions. And any questions it doesn't answer, you are more than welcome to ask myself or Doug. Where do we get our protein and fat sources from? How are we best to use them? The High Energy Diet Recipe Guide we have over there. This is an amazing little book, because I was working at a place the other day and this lady came up to me. She quite clever and she said, "Could I have a word with you in private?" I said, "Yes, of course." And she said, "Could you recommend a recipe book for a lady who doesn't know where the kitchen is?" This is the one I recommended her because it's so simple the way it's set out. And you'll find that the recipes in here show you how to incorporate fats and proteins in your diet in appropriate combinations and in appropriate ways. The fat and the protein is an important issue to consider. One of the reasons that high protein foods have been marketed so heavily is because they cost the consumer the most to buy. Therefore, they are marketed heavily. Unfortunately, after World War II, when people had been told if you don't eat enough protein you'll get a little pot belly, and people rushed out feeling that all during the war they'd been deprived of protein. The studies that have been developed since that time, they were done at the time and put into print later on, have revealed that there was a direct correlation between heart disease and stroke during the war, before and after. We found that the fat intake before the war was relatively high. Animal fats, cholesterol, saturated fats, and correspondingly so was the incidence amongst the population of heart disease and stroke. During the war, the fat consumption went down, the cholesterol consumption went down. People were lucky to get their bit of flesh, maybe just on a Sunday. Dairy products were really hard to come by. Heart disease and stroke came down almost in exact alignment with that reduction. Post-war, they went equally back up again, hand in hand. Those studies terrified the meat marketing industry and the dairy industry, and they've spent a lot of time trying to encourage people to eat their products and trying to suppress the results of those studies. But there is unquestionably a major connection between excess fat consumption and cancer, excess protein consumption and cancer. Face it, for most people today, if it's not heart attack and stroke that gets them, it's cancer that turns out to be the end of their life or the cause of their demise. Both of those situations are related to excess fats and proteins. Does anyone feel that there's anything concerning them about either the carbohydrate issue Doug talked about or the fat or the protein? If there is, what I want you to do is hold that question, make a note of it, because at the end we're going to have time for you to ask questions and to go through queries and concerns. At this point, set out the basics. And as Doug mentioned, as we go on, we will keep building on the things that we've set out for you.
At this point, we're getting a feeling that if we cover our nutritional bases, we're going to be eating very well. The feeling that we want to be able to imbue upon you, one that shows a continuity of ideas rather than the idea that, well, I have to eat this in order to get this, but then I have to eat this in order to get this. I have to eat the refined oils if I hope to get enough essential fatty acids, and I have to eat protein out of a can if I want to get enough of my proteins, or I have to eat supplements of this or that or the next if I want to hopefully even chase that nutrient race around. And then, gosh, by the time you eat all that and that and that, what it turns out is that as we start to go into these concentrated forms of foods, it is true, you get more of certain things, but you also get less of other things. And in the world of nutrition, what we're always looking for are foods whose nutrient content closely mimics our nutrient needs. In the world of fruit, we find hundreds of almost every variety of fruit that exists. Thousands of types of dates. There's hundreds of types of bananas. There's hundreds of types of almost every fruit you can name. Most of us can think right off the top of our head and name several dozen different types of apples. We know that there's dozens of kinds of citrus and dozens of kinds of peaches available in the stores. But in fact, there are hundreds of those. And if we look in various books that talk about fruit culture, what we find is that it is a rare fruit indeed that doesn't have at least 200 different types available for us to eat. They're not all marketed to the same extreme degree as the ones that are considered the winners, that have the best shelf life or the best shippability or the best storability, or for some reason make them deal with bugs better. So we'll tend to focus in production on certain key varieties. But the variety is out there to the degree that in the course of my year, on average, I'll consume about 200 different kinds of fruit, 50 different kinds of vegetables, 24 sources of fats. And doing so, ensure for myself excellent nutrition, because variety is the way to get great nutrition. The way to absorb foods well, the way to digest them well, and the way to ensure the best assimilation is through simplicity. These two concepts are not in conflict with each other, simplicity and variety. We apply them to different situations. Simplicity at the meal means a reduction in the number of courses, a reduction in the number of ingredients in each dish. Variety in the diet is secured throughout the course of a year. When we take the time to think about it, we realize that literally every month of the year brings us several fruits that are only available then, or that are in their prime then. And each month brings something new to the table for us in this way. It is not essential that we get every nutrient at every meal, as was taught at times. But in learning further about nutrition, we realized that this is not the case. Our body spares various nutrients, making this constant search for the next nutrient and get them all on my plate really an unnecessary endeavor. It also provides us with a freedom to eat what is available. A marvelous thing because it allows us to take part in one of the most important aspects of all nutrition, which is the concept of fresh food. Fresh food's been bandied about in many ways. It's been used in bastardized terminology such as fresh frozen. To me, it seems like a conflict. If it's frozen, it's frozen. It's no longer fresh. We hear it in other ways. Fresh baked. It's not fresh if it was baked, but they want that word because in both instances, the understanding that fresh is an important ingredient in wholesome foods, healthy eating, they want to find a way to associate with that word fresh. We associate it in another way when people talk about eating local grown foods. Oh, you really should eat foods from your area. We're tropical creatures. We live in tropical environment. We call it clothing. We call it heating. We call it bedding. We keep ourselves in a tropical environment all the time, at comfortable body temperature. The foods that support us are foods that come from that tropical environment. Those support us in the most ideal way. We can survive on others, but we thrive on the foods that are our ideal foods. Local grown doesn't even ensure. Local grown increases the possibility that the food is, in fact, fresh. So, we were up in New York City not too long ago at the big farmer's market that happens in downtown. There was fresh apples and fresh berries and fresh grapes, local grown, just up in the Hudson Valley area. So, we bought those foods because those were the freshest organic foods available. The concept that I wish to discuss at this segment has to do with food combining. And food combining is a much misunderstood area of food discussion and nutrition topic because most people don't know what happens to their food after they swallow it. Something happens because they feel pretty confident they're going to see it again sometime. But the in-between stuff, what exactly happened? And I'm not going to bore you with what exactly happens. Because in reality, we don't know. We know a lot of what happens. But nutritional science has not yet figured out exactly what happens. And there are points in the digestive process where if you open up the most expensive, most up-to-date, and most in-depth nutritional textbook, it will say, well, they don't say, and here a miracle happens. That's a concept we kind of save. But they go, we don't really know how this transition transpires. We don't exactly know how this chemistry takes place, but we know it goes from, and then it's in a whole new thing. Realize that there are parts of the digestive process that we don't understand, that nobody understands. It's possible that we never will. There are parts that we do understand. We know certain things about nutrition. We know that if you get a strong acid in your mouth, it burns like crazy. We know from television commercials there's acid in our stomach. And when the contents of our stomach come up into our mouth, it burns like crazy. It's not the most pleasant of the feelings that we have. We know from deduction at that point that in our mouth it is not acid, it is alkaline. And we know from science that the lining of our mouth is the same as the lining surrounding the anus. That when the food actually comes out, it would burn if it was acidic there too. Every once in a while, we've all had the misfortune of having that experience. And it burns. By deduction, we go the bottom half of the digestive tract. It's not acid. What we call the intestines is an alkaline experience. In our mouth, it's alkaline. In our stomach, it's acid. In the intestines, it's alkaline. If you take an almond and put it in your mouth, don't chew it, but take an almond and put it in your mouth. As they say in some of the commercials, just put an almond between your cheek and gum and leave it there. You could have it there all day, and nothing would happen to it. It doesn't digest in what we call the salivary amylase that happens in our mouth. But we know that if we take something that is carbohydrate, whether it's a simple or a complex carbohydrate, and put that in our mouth, that it melts in our mouth. It disappears. Sugars turn to water in the presence of salivary amylase. At this point, we know what we need to know about food combining. Almost. We know that carbohydrates digest chemically in our mouth if we leave them there for a while. Mix them with salivary amylase through chewing. We know that protein foods and fat foods, which is what an almond is made up of, protein and fat, they don't digest in the alkalinity of our mouth, hence won't digest in the alkalinity of our intestines. For the most part, none of digestion can be expressed in absolutes. There are, if we use the word continuum, if we want to use the nuances that happen, there are little bits and pieces of insights, and I won't even call them exception, but the body allows for a fair amount of flexibility. At this point, we think, how does the body do that? The brain-body connection is a profound connection. You don't have to know what you're eating in order for it to digest. You could be blind. You could have a stuffed nose. You could have no sense of taste whatsoever. Your body can figure out how to digest your foods. But when we give it more cues and more clues, the body does even a better job of digesting. In fact, you can smell certain foods that will set your mouth watering. And you can bet that if you do a test of the water, that the proper digestive enzymes are being secreted. Salivary amylase digests the carbohydrate foods in an alkaline medium. The proteins and fats are digested in our stomach in an acid medium. If you mix an alkaline and an acid, they neutralize each other. If you chew almonds in your mouth and measure the alkalinity of the mouth, it will be far greater if we eat carbohydrate foods than if we eat fat protein foods. This has been measured and tested. There is a range available of what your mouth can produce, how alkaline or how towards acid it can actually go. The same with our stomach. A tremendous range in the amount of acidity that it can produce. What we're left with is a relatively simple idea. If we ask the body to digest protein fat, such as an almond, it will produce very little salivary amylase, very much acid in the stomach. If, on the other hand, we ask it to digest high carbohydrate fruit, such as our mamey, a tropical fruit, I don't know how they ever got to call it mamey. I'll leave that to your imagination. What we find happen is that we produce a fantastic amount of salivary amylase. The alkalinity of our mouth goes as high as it can possibly go, and the acidity of the stomach is as little acid as possible. When the food drops into our stomach, no acid is produced because none is needed. When we put these types of foods together, highly alkaline requiring foods and highly acid requiring foods, we're sending mixed messages to our digestive tract. We're asking the body to do two opposing things in the same places. When we put ham and cheese, which are fat protein mixtures, onto a slice of bread, when we put cereal with milk, when we put almonds in our dates, when we mix our fat protein rich foods with our high carbohydrate foods, we're making it difficult. It's not that no digestion happens, but digestion must, by its very nature, be impaired. It must be compromised. And we know this is the case because we see over-the-counter remedies for digestive disorders are the number one sold. Prescription drugs for digestive disorders are the number one prescription drugs sold. More people go to doctors for digestive disorders than for any any other reason. More surgeries are performed on people for digestive system disorders than for any other reason. We see over and over television commercials admitting to us that we know in advance the foods we're going to eat are going to hurt us. And they have their own say on what to do. What we recommend as far as what to do is to avoid those influences and substances that we know are going to hurt us, and to participate in those things that will allow us to have a healthy body. We end up with very simple guidelines as far as food combining. The first two revolve around carbohydrates in the form of starch. Carbohydrate starch does not combine well with protein, as we've just said, and carbohydrate starch does not combine well with simple carbohydrates. When we mix simple and complex carbohydrates together, the beer commercials tell us we end up with the production of alcohol and gas. The alcohol is no good for us, the gas is no good for everybody else. We've all had the experience of, it must have been something I ate, the explosive reaction, the body blowing up with gases, indigestion of a wide variety. To have to say it must have been something I ate rather than to know what. The two ingredients of many explosives are completely inert and safe to handle of their own. But you put them together and we end up with that explosive TNT that is unstable. The same thing can happen with foods. We don't recommend that you put carbohydrates in the form of starch with protein or carbohydrates in the form of starch with simple carbohydrates. For raw fooders, it becomes a much easier issue because we're not looking to consume complex carbohydrates. There are very few of them that we can consume. Yes, it's possible to soak wild rice. Yes, it's possible to soak some grains. We will talk about why those aren't optimum food sources for us anyway. In terms of the rest of food combining, what we're really suggesting is to keep it as simple as you can. To reduce the number of ingredients in the meal, to reduce the number of courses in the meal, to eat the water-rich foods first because they're not going to ever mix with the foods that are slower to digest that will spend more time in our stomach. And to use the guidelines of food combining as stepping stones towards simplifying your diet so that we can say, I only had 5 ingredients in my meal. I only had 4 ingredients in my meal. Eventually we get to a point where we can make a meal of a food. How many people in the room actually know about what this food is, the meme? Oh, a few. There'll be some tastes. It tastes better than the filling of pumpkin pie. Eventually, we want to get to a point where we're not food combining. So when people ask me, do you believe in food combining? I go, well, yes, I believe it exists. Do I practice it? No. And they get all upset. You don't practice food combining. Well, no, I don't practice food combining. I don't combine. I eat one food at a time. When I'm hungry till I'm full, and I find this works better, and I will admit to you, I understand if anybody's digging in their heels. I dug in my heels when I first heard that concept. What? One food at a time when I'm hungry till I'm full? How am I ever going to live with that? Well, I practiced. It got to be not only something I could live with, but something I prefer. In fact, all nutrients known to man are in this one piece of fruit. Granted, some of them are in very minute quantities, but they're all there. And in every piece of fruit, they're all there. Food combining at that point, wow, there's 1 million nutrients. It's incredible food combining. The body is set up to handle it that way. One food at a time when we're hungry till we're full. This is the ideal in food combining. Keep reducing the number of ingredients, reducing the number of courses in the meal, and you'll find digestion improves accordingly. That the worries about protein, fat, and carbohydrate become non-issues. As you take care of the quality of your foods, both the quantity of your foods and the nutritional concerns that go with them become a thing of the past.
The next subject has inspired me as I've pursued and continued to try and improve my diet and my lifestyle. This whole concept of understanding on a scientific level, why is heating food nutritionally detrimental? Why is it better to eat food as nature has presented it to us in its raw natural state? In the next 20 minutes, I want to try and give you guidance as to how you can not only become more inspired down your own path to rawdom, but also when other people approach you and they make comments such as, why are you eating in rabbit food, or whatever it is, the typical common expression, you will be able to give a concise, scientific response that'll knock their socks off, if they're wearing any. Let's talk about those 3 caloronutrients, the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins. When carbohydrates are subjected to heat, let's first of all be clear what we know about when we say the word carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is a group of foods that can be subdivided into two little departments. If you see carbohydrates written, you'll see it written as CHO. It doesn't stand for chocolate. It stands for carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And those two little subgroups, one subgroup are the starches, those things that you would put heat to in order to render them digestible by humans, because they're not designed for humans to consume. So it's grains and really starchy root vegetables. The other branch of carbohydrates is the simple sugars, such as fruit, which is the form which adult human beings are supposed to be taking in their carbohydrates. If you're a baby human, you take that in through the mother's breast milk in the form of lactose. Seeing as we're over 3 years old here, I'm not going to talk much about lactose. I'm going to talk about our adult food carbohydrate supply, fruit. It doesn't matter whether it's fruit or whether it's starch. If it's carbohydrate and you subject heat to it, one of the things that's going to happen is it's going to become hydrolyzed. Guess what that means?
Bonds are broken with hydrogen on one end and OH on the other end.
Yeah, that's a complex way of putting it. What is happening is it is becoming water saturated. If you put food in a microwave oven, you might not put any water in with it when you put it in there, but when you open the oven door, it's moist on the inside. When you take loaves of bread out of the oven and you wrap them up in a tea towel, the tea towel gets quickly damp with freshly baked bread. It becomes water saturated. When carbohydrates are water saturated, this means that they dilute the effectiveness of the salivary amylase that Doug was speaking about, and the amylase that's produced a little bit further down in your gastrointestinal tract. The water saturation dilutes its effectiveness. When carbohydrates aren't properly digested, they have a habit of fermenting, as Doug has spoken of. Fermenting of carbohydrates isn't brought about by poor food combining. It is also brought about when carbohydrates are subjected to heat. The results of fermentation, as mentioned, gases, also alcohols, and a substance called acetic acid. In your kitchen, common name for a diluted acetic acid. Vinegar is acetic acid diluted in many parts water. Acetic acid in your body is not something you want there. Why? Because it has some pretty dramatic effects upon your physiology. First, acetic acid stimulates your thyroid gland, throws your body out of its natural balance and kilter with the complex interaction of its endocrine system. In addition to that, the presence of acetic acid causes phosphorus to be leached from your body. When phosphorus is lost from your body, this affects your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys, known as your stress glands, because when you trigger your fight or flight response and you prepare yourself to fight or run, I'm assuming that most of you, when you do have uncomfortable meetings with anybody that causes you stress, you realize that your body is preparing itself to fight or run. Knowing that, when you feel stressed, you realize the thing to do is to do what your body is preparing itself to do, to fight or run, physical movement. So next time that you're feeling really upset by somebody and you're feeling stressed, the most helpful thing to do is to do a few jump jacks or run on the spot. The fight or flight response is what the adrenal glands are involved with. And when the adrenal glands suffer, not just through excess stress, but the leaching of this phosphorus, what is happening? They are unable to function fully. And when they're unable to function fully, we get physical symptoms. And those symptoms include body odor, production of mucus. Your body produces mucus from orifices you didn't even know you had. When you start suffering from decreased adrenal functioning, your heart rate will beat faster. Headaches result of having malfunctioning adrenals. This could all come about simply because you have put your carbohydrates in the fire. People might say, well, we've been putting our food in the fire for a long time. It is an incredibly short period of overall human existence that we have been putting our food in the fire. In any case, just because something's been done for a long time doesn't make it right. It means we haven't learned that lesson yet. We can end up with body odor, the sniffles, and headaches. Very common symptoms amongst people. We can end up with that because we cooked our carbohydrates. In addition to that, when you subject carbohydrates to heat, you are causing the gradual production or accumulation of charcoal. This is like if you take a piece of bread and you toast it. If you toast it very gently, it goes a little bit brown. If you put it in the toaster and go take a shower and forget about it and come back and you pull out this black square, this is a lot of charcoal. It's progressive. Even small amounts of charcoal are undesirable inside your body. Charcoal is a known, listed and registered carcinogen. It can contribute to causing cancer. About the proteins, this is a really interesting one. When you take proteins and you put them in the fire, pretty dramatic things start to happen there. One thing that happens is that the cement that connects all the little bricks in the protein houses, the joining of the amino acids, the peptide bonds. I'm staying away from scientific language. You're very well versed in it. I'm trying to deliver this in a way that people can understand the concept, but thank you for contributing that. I like to think of protein like a house and made up of bricks, and they're the amino acids, and between the amino acids is cement. When you subject protein to heat, this cement becomes incredibly tough for your body to break apart. Because what your body wants to do is take proteins into itself and break them down into their amino acid forms, to do a demolition job on the house and break it down to rubble, into individual bricks. Then the body takes those bricks and builds the protein houses it needs. Unfortunately, when we subjected protein to heat, the body has a tough job in doing that. And instead of having individual bricks passing through into the bloodstream, we end up having chunks of rubble passing through, called polypeptides, when we have many amino acids joined together, multiple being described as poly. These chains of amino acids, these polypeptides, have the unfortunate habit of triggering the response of the body in prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are things that create and set up inflammation in response to the presence of a foreign object, something that is a threat to the body. This is why heated proteins are the number one cause of rheumatoid arthritis and gout and other such conditions called autoimmune disorders. It's not a disorder. Your body isn't attacking itself. What happens is your body is trying to deal with something that's threatening its integrity, something that shouldn't even be in there, because we put heat on our proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids, and there's two amino acids that are specifically affected by application of heat. One is called methionine. The other one is cysteine. Cysteine and methionine are dramatically affected when heat is applied to protein. Both, in their natural form, have a component of sulfur. And sulfur is your body's number one disinfecting agent. It's highly utilized and involved in maintaining healthy and normal cellular functioning. The presence of sulfur in your body helps to prevent cells from turning cancerous or having and adopting strange behavior. The key issue, however, is the body can only use the sulfur when it is where it was supposed to be, attached as part of those amino acids, methionine and cysteine. Once the sulfur has been removed away, the body cannot use it. So as soon as you heat proteins, you compromise your ability to avoid the development of cancerous cells. Methionine and cysteine also have specific responsibilities in the body themselves. Methionine is involved in the production of a substance called hemoglobin. Where do you find hemoglobin? In your blood. And what does hemoglobin do in your blood?
Carries oxygen.
Yeah, it attracts oxygen. And this is one of the wonderful fairy tale stories that goes on inside your body. What happens? Oxygen is a princess. Princess Oxygen, she gets sucked in through your nose or your mouth, and she travels down through the various passages in your body until she arrives in your lungs inside a bubble. There, beautiful Princess Oxygen sits. And wrapped around the bubble is a red brick road. You call it a capillary, I call it a capillary. I'm English, you're American. The capillary is wrapped around this little bubble. Going along that red brick road is a knight in shining armour on his horse. This knight in shining armour is hemoglobin. Princess sits there in her bubble and she looks out onto this red brick road and she says, "What a handsome knight." And she feels so attracted that she leaps out of her bubble and jumps onto the back of his horse. And they go galloping off together down the red brick road, and that's how Princess Oxygen ends up in your body, being transported to the cells by hemoglobin. It's a wonderful romance. The key point is, if your body has had its proteins heated and the sulfur removed, it becomes crippled in its ability to use that methionine to manufacture hemoglobin. So there she sits in her bubble, waiting for the knight in shining armour. And meanwhile, because there's fewer knights in shining armour on the road, the cells of your body start to suffer from lack of oxygen. Cancer thrives in an anaerobic environment where there is no oxygen, and cancer cells cannot survive and thrive where there is plenty of oxygen. That's the second reason why heating protein contributes to the development of cancerous cells. In addition to that, cysteine is used as an important constituent in red blood cell manufacture. When the sulfur's been removed, your body's crippled in its ability to use that cysteine to manufacture your red blood cells, and as a consequence, is limited or reduced in its ability to get oxygen delivered to the cells of your body. This has enormous implications for athletes, people who want to excel with what they do from a physical capacity. If they stopped eating their proteins, it would make a major difference. Cysteine and methionine, and the issue with sulfur being removed is a big one when it comes to proteins. So is the heating of proteins creating that cement that becomes so tough the body can't break it apart. We also know that when we heat the carbohydrates, we're going to end up with headaches, body odour and mucus production. The whole picture is looking too good so far for people who eat all of their food. And what about the fats? Here we get to another really interesting one. Of the 3 caloronutrients, the most dangerous one to put in the fire is fat. There are various reasons. One reason is heated fats are stickier than fats in their raw natural condition. Think for a minute of taking an avocado, cutting it open, mashing it up on a plate and eating that avocado. And let's imagine you're eating that avocado on that plate and you go to wash the plate up. Do you think that if you turned on the tap and rinsed it under the tap, most of the avocado would come off?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want you to imagine that you decide to make a lasagna, a vegan lasagna using avocado. You get the avocado and you mash it all up, spread it out on your sheets of lasagna and you bake it. And then you eat the lasagna and it's time to wash the dish up. Do you think you're going to be able to rinse it in the same way that you could the raw avocado? Or are you going to get the little special implement that's abrasive with the detergent and put on the rubber gloves and start rubbing away? It's sticky. It adheres. And when you have heated fats going around in your blood, it tends to cause the blood cells to stick together. And we're back to that issue of the blood forming thrombosis, embolism, fragment of something that can cause a blockage somewhere down the line within the system. So heated fats contribute to heart attack and stroke because of the formation of these thrombus and the blockaging of blood supply to the heart or to the brain. Studies were done comparing people who worked in deep fry establishments and people who smoked. The reason that this study was done was because it was discovered that when fats were heated, there was a gas given off called acrolein gas. It comes from acrylic acid. Acrylic acid forms when fats are heated. What was discovered was people who smoked 20 cigarettes a day and had done for 10 years, but didn't work in a deep fry establishment, were at less risk of lung cancer than people who didn't smoke and worked in a deep fry kitchen. So next time you go past somewhere they're deep frying, I encourage you not to go, that smells good, because you're drawing this very, very carcinogenic acrylic gas down into your lungs. Heating fats has the effect that they will coat the lining, because they're sticky, of your intestinal tract, making it very difficult for digestion and absorption through the villi of the intestinal tract to take place of the various nutrients. Heated fats also have the effect of placing such an incredibly high demand upon your body to be able to wade through the challenge of sticky digestion that you end up with depleted energy. You actually feel tired when heated fats are in your diet. You're probably familiar with free radicals. Free radicals are hot on the lips of people who are health enthusiasts. Free radicals are unstable oxygen molecules. They're willing to attach onto anything because they're so unstable. And in doing so, they have a knock-on effect within the body which leads to various major concerns and problems, not least of which is to damage the inside of the arterial walls. We're back to the heart disease and stroke story, but also to create problems with premature aging. When I'm saying aging, I don't mean from an aesthetic point of view. I mean the literal physical degeneration of your entire physiology. We have a little army, however, that is designed to combat free radicals, because to some degree they are going to be present within our bodies. It's all part of the natural way of things. In modern day, because of the level of pollution that we live within, the percentage of free radicals is far, far higher in our bodies than it would be in our healthful natural environment. Nevertheless, we do have a little army to help protect us against these things. And that army consists of vitamin E, vitamin A, as well as vitamin C and selenium, and beta-carotene. Beta-carotene being, of course, part of that vitamin A. It just so happens that vitamin A and vitamin E are what we call fat-soluble vitamins. That means we store them in fat. That's how we suspend them. What we also find is that when we heat fats, not only are we creating a massive increase in free radicals within our body, but at the same time we are destroying those fat-soluble vitamins that protect us against those free radicals. We are destroying our vitamin E and our vitamin A by the application of heat. That information gives you ammunition to respond to people when they say to you, well, what's with this raw thing, or what's this raw you're doing? Also to inspire yourself. When you're wanting to stay on that raw path and you feel yourself drawn towards the bakery or drawn towards the deep fry establishment, you can bring that information and it'll help to inspire you. To conclude, to remind us what those factors are. When you think carbohydrate, think vinegar. When you heat carbohydrate, you're producing vinegar in your body. And when you think vinegar, you can think body odour, headaches, and mucus production, because of the way that vinegar leaches phosphorus and compromises your adrenal glands. You can also think of the piece of toast and the production of charcoal. That's a listed and recognised carcinogen. When you think of protein, think of the house with the bricks. Think of your body trying to do that demolition job to break the house down to its individual bricks so that a new house, a human house, can be built. And you can imagine your body having a real battle and these big chunks of rubble passing into your bloodstream instead of the individual bricks. And the result being inflammation of your joints, amongst other things. You can also think, when you think of heating proteins, of those two amino acids, those two particular bricks, the methionine and the cysteine. Think of the sulfur being separated. And when it's separated, we know we can't use the sulfur, our body's primary disinfectant. And we know that methionine and cysteine are also, our ability to use them is very compromised, leading to oxygen deprivation of our cells. Because methionine is needed for hemoglobin and cysteine is needed for red blood corpuscles. When we think of fats, think of the stickiness and the possibility of our blood clotting inside of our vessels and it coating the inside of our intestines so that we can't digest and absorb properly. Also think of that deep fry establishment and the tests done between the smokers and the non-smokers working in that establishment and the higher incidence they had of lung cancer. Hopefully, if you could remember one of those, it'll be an inspiration to you next time you reach for your raw salad or your raw fruit, rather than giving in to the addictions and the compulsions that a warped